Hi everyone, welcome to today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. Before I introduce our moderator, I just wanted to make a quick announcement about something that we had a flyer about up there, and I think hopefully there's still some, but you can ask me about it afterwards if anything. Our office is hosting a bike drive for refugee families. We're trying to collect by the end of the semester in April at least 20 bikes to donate to the CWS Miami office. CWS Miami is one of several agencies, nonprofit agencies, that works directly with the U.S. Department of State in terms of resettling refugees from other countries. And they're currently working with refugees from not just any one part of the world, but they're working right now with refugees from Democratic Republic of Congo, Uganda, Burma, Iraq, Colombia, Cuba, and more. And, one of the things that some of the families have been asking for is it'd be great if they had a bike, not only for their kids, but also for themselves to get around to work and stuff, because usually you don't have a car immediately after arriving from another country. So there are a couple ways you can help. If you want to donate an actual bike, there's actually an FIU bike shop on campus over by Panther Garage, and that's a drop-off location for the bikes. Let them know that you have a bike, and our representative from the resettlement agency would go get it from them. And then if you want to donate money, you can either come to my office, GL 466, or we actually have a GoFundMe set up now at go.fiu.edu/bike drive, one word. And all the money that gets donated will go towards, first, any minor repairs that might need to be made towards the actual bikes that are donated, which are hopefully very, very minimal, and then anything else would go towards buying even more bikes. So again, we have a goal of 20 bikes. If you have questions about it, you can ask me. You can actually also ask Ashanti, who's our student representative. She's the chair of the whole campaign on the student end and really does much more for it than I do. So I'm excited to introduce my very own friend and coworker for today's Tuesday Times Roundtable. So Bahia Simons Lane is a graduate assistant that works in the Office of Global Learning Initiatives here at FIU. After teaching English in Japan for 3 years and returning to the United States, she earned her master's degree in International and Intercultural Education, along with a certificate in Asian Studies here at FIU. She's currently pursuing her PhD in Curriculum and Instruction, also here at FIU. Her research focuses on global learning and global education. She's the president of the Florida chapter of the Japan Education and Teaching Program, which is more usually known as the JET program, which is a great opportunity to go teach English abroad in Japan, which is what she did. If that sounds like something that piques your interest and you want to go to Japan to do that, I encourage you to talk to her afterwards. So she's the president of the Alumni Association for that, and through that she promotes Japanese culture in Florida and helps recruit people for the JET program. And so I'll turn it over to Bahia.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm very excited to be here and doing my first Tuesday Times Roundtable, so this is pretty exciting. Before I start talking about Japan and the disaster that happened there, I want to mention kind of why I am talking about this topic. And as Eric mentioned, I used to teach English in Japan. I lived there for 3 years. My husband lived there for 9 years. And I feel like when you witness a national disaster like the tsunami and the earthquake, when it's someplace that you have connection to and ties to, it becomes more personal. I mean, of course, when you're watching any type of natural disaster, it's hard to take your eyes away and you worry about the people and you want to help. But when it's someplace that feels like your second home or your second country, you really have that personal connection. And as you can see, I taught English in Japan. My students are on the top. They've all now graduated from college and are doing their own thing. And then on the bottom, I also taught at some special needs schools. So it's just I felt very connected to the country, and I feel like now is a really good time to look back and think about what happened, and then also look forward to see what has happened in the recovery and what will happen in the recovery. And so the 5-year anniversary of the earthquake and tsunami is on March 11th, and so this is the perfect time to kind of both look back and look across the years and then look forward. So before I start telling you about what happened, I'm very interested to know what you guys know about the earthquake and tsunami and what happened 5 years ago. So does anybody want to volunteer some information? Remember what happened? Yes?
I know that the tsunami hit was much higher than the reactors, and they had planned on that when they initially built the reactors.
Right, exactly. Anyone else? Shirley, yes?
It was a huge tsunami came to the Tohoku area, which is what you know facing. It's inside of Japan, and like most of the houses or buildings were like thrown over.
Anyone else? All right. So, these are some New York Times articles, one from 2011 and one from 2015, and what you guys said is exactly right. There was a nuclear disaster, there was a tsunami, and there was an earthquake. And a lot of the New York Times articles reflected that. They talked about what happened then, and then this article which is the one you have out, is from last year, about how there's still a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done. There are still people in temporary housing. But before we talk about what has happened in the recovery effort, let's go back and talk about what actually happened. So it was a triple disaster. It wasn't just one thing that happened. It wasn't just an earthquake. It wasn't just a tsunami. And it wasn't just a nuclear disaster. There were all these three things that kind of contributed to each other. And so the earthquake was a really, really high magnitude earthquake. It was a 9.0 magnitude earthquake, much higher than they had forecast would happen. And it occurred about 17 miles under the water and created a gigantic tsunami wave that was more than 20 meters tall. So basically more than 5 stories, like 5 stories of a building. So it was an extremely big wave, and it really hit the coast of Japan very, very hard. And the nuclear reactor in Fukushima, it had been built to withstand the earthquake, and it didn't have any severe damage from the earthquake. But once it was hit by the tsunami, it couldn't cope with, it just didn't have enough safeguards in place. They didn't think a tsunami wave would be that big, and so you ended up having kind of this triple disaster where you had not only an earthquake that did a lot of damage, then a tsunami that did a lot of damage, and then you had the nuclear reactor. And as of the most recent numbers, there were more than almost 16,000 people killed, and there's still more than 2,500 missing. Now, this video I'm going to show was traffic cams. So basically traffic cameras capturing what happened, and the way that you see a perfectly normal road, and then suddenly all this water comes in, and they had sped up that traffic camera so that you could really see the full impact of the devastation. All right, so what happened? So as I said, waves of over 20 feet struck the coast of Japan. This image on the left-hand side shows where the epicenter was. So it was off the coast of Sendai. It was underwater, and it was near the edge of 2 fault plains. And the image on the left shows the traveling of the tsunami waves, and in black are the waves above 8 feet tall. So the waves hit the coast of Japan above 8 feet tall, and then some of them even made it as far as Hawaii, and in 21 hours they had gone all the way across the ocean. So this is a pretty huge magnitude natural disaster, and it's pretty incredible what happened. All right, so I want to show you, and this is going to take us out of the presentation, but I want to show you some before and after pictures. So these images show what it was like before the wave hit, and then what it was like after. So for example, this is the nuclear reactor in Fukushima before the tsunami and earthquake hit. And this is what it looked like after. As you can see, 2 of the buildings were almost completely destroyed, and then one on the right was knocked down quite a bit. The countryside in the north of Sendai was very dramatically impacted. You had these, typical lush green land, and then after the tsunami, it was almost total devastation. Because this wasn't just a natural disaster, it also had some impact on the nuclear sentiment of Japan. Does anyone know anything about, what are your opinions about nuclear power? How do you think nuclear sentiment might have changed after this incident? Now, in Japan, 30% of their power was from nuclear power before the earthquake and tsunami. Any comments? Yes.
There was a demand to shut down nuclear plants in Japan, and they're like trying to increase like other power, so like a lot more important oil.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe people perceive the nuclear power as dangerous and they don't want to produce anymore.
Yeah, exactly. They actually ended up shutting down all of the nuclear reactors in Japan, and it's only just recently that they're about to restart the power plant, some of the power plants. In the aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami, when they shut down all the nuclear reactors, there were rolling blackouts across Japan because they had to, scramble to find new energy sources. So this incident did have a big impact on nuclear sentiment among the average people, and even with the plans to restart the new nuclear reactors, a lot of people are not too happy about that idea. All right, so I'm going to show you a clip of a video that we're actually showing this documentary on March 30th. And this was created by an alumni of the JET program, the Japan Exchange and Teaching Program. And it's about a lot of the different groups that mobilized to help and volunteer in Japan right in the aftermath of the earthquake.
I didn't quite understand that, there were people who traveled from other countries to Japan just to volunteer, just because they've been to Japan, in the past, and they felt a need to, to help out the people in Tohoku.
There's the word kaimetsu, which means, total destruction, or oblivion, and they would be using words like that to describe the situation of certain towns.
I just wanted to be able to have a chance to give back, even if it wasn't in Akita, it was still in the Tohoku area.
I just met people from all over the world who just dropped everything and came for a month, 3 months, or quit their jobs and moved to volunteer, and that just kind of, I didn't get it, but there's that connection that people want to do something worthwhile and really help people in need. So
I think the earthquake really, for me, changed my perspective about volunteering and giving back to the community that really has treated us so well since day one. So it's almost like a duty to give back. I feel a strong sense of duty and responsibility to do whatever I can.
I can't just sit here. I have to get up there and do what I can.
This movie is called Tohoku Tomo, and Tohoku is the region where most of the devastation occurred with the earthquake, and Tomo is short for Tomodachi, which means friend in Japanese. And we're going to be screening this movie on March 30th, so I hope you all will come. It's free, and the director is flying down from Chicago to be there, and the Consul General of Japan will also be there to talk about it. There's no way I could really go into all the detail about all the efforts that people did, but this documentary does a really, really good job at it.
So to clarify the room so people can show up, it's GL100, right?
GL100, yes.
It says G100.
GL100, yes, please come. All right, so we talked a little bit about what happened and in the direct aftermath of the earthquake and tsunami. So I found some pictures that I think are really powerful to share 1 year after the disaster. So this image of Yuko Sugimoto, she's holding a picture of herself that became a very iconic image after the earthquake and tsunami, of herself wrapped in blankets in front of a lot of debris. And at the time, she was looking for her 2-year-old son, who fortunately she found, and he was all right. But so they took a picture. She's standing in the exact same spot that was once covered in debris and now is a parking lot, now that the recovery has kept going. This other picture shows all of these photographs and personal items that are on display. Were on display 1 year later after the tsunami and the earthquake. So, of course, you want to rebuild a sense of normalcy after an incident like this. And so they collected all of these personal items that they could find and put them on display so people could go and browse them and try to find some connection with their family or with items that they had. These next images, these are before and after pictures. So the ones on the left are immediately after the earthquake and tsunami. You can see they're covered in debris. And then 1 year later, as the reconstruction has been progressing, you see on the top they've cleared away all that debris. The buildings that were still standing are still there. And on the bottom right, you have this boat that had been washed in from the ocean. They cleaned out everything else, but they've left the boat there. And I believe the boat is still there today as kind of a monument to what happened. And then on a little more hopeful note, in Rikuzen Takata, this town was basically completely wiped away in the earthquake and tsunami. There was actually a jet program teacher there, and he passed away, and so did pretty much everybody in the town. But this one pine tree that was left, they really see this as a symbol of hope. Rather than looking into the past, you're looking to the future, and you're looking to be more hopeful as to the reconstruction that's going to happen moving forward. All right, so now we're here for 5 years later, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about volunteer efforts that were done, but I found this great video about these students from Singapore who went to Japan to talk to people in the region about their stories. And so I'm going to share that video with you.
さっき食べた50年ぐらいなんじゃない津波の市津波の前の市まで出てだったので津波の市に何回行きたくなったと思って買い物に行ったとそれが正解だってこういう網やってる中では
We were a little bit worried that they wouldn't maybe open up because we were strangers. Then there's that language barrier, so we weren't sure how they would respond to us.
I knew we had to be very respectful. We couldn't push so much because we thought, why would they want to tell us stories about things that are painful or things that they wanted to forget?
その時まで津波のこと考えてなかったんね、私たちは。で津波は約40分後だから。まあそうしてる間にみんな津波が来るんだったってこう高でさ上がっていったわけねなんかで私は最後までまだいたんだけどね
It wasn't easy at first. I remembered being afraid to ask questions about what they experienced during the tsunami because I just didn't want them to feel hurt or to just break down.
一応ねあと旦那さん亡くして子供亡くした人もいるのねまあそういったあれはなるだけ談話室によっておじゃっこの目っていう俗に言うねそれでもってみんなでその災害の時の話だったりしながらまああとあまり今度は亡くなったことに触れないようにしながら
The people there they really surprised me because they were so open and they were so friendly. They welcomed us into their home. Like I thought they would be very reserved, very shy, very afraid to talk to us, but they were actually the complete opposite.
もう家ね前にうち津波で流される前に20年ぐらい建ててまずねローンが残っていたんですけどもほらうちはもうないから子供のためにもほらね前向いて歩いていこうかなと思ってます、ね、
It was so amazing when we realized that the people we met, every single person that we met wanted to talk about their story.
They don't have any form of barrier, okay, you are Singaporean, I'm Japanese, so we cannot be together. But they are just very, they treat everyone like part of their community.
I saw this little hut, like a memorial. What struck me was this letter on the memorial stone. We asked our translator, what did it say? And she read it and she teared a bit, like she had to wipe a tear away. And then the letter said, it has been 4 years and you will be in university now. I hope you're doing fine. I hope you're happy. I couldn't. I just stepped out. After that, I was more determined to tell the story of these survivors. You know, like these families who have been living there since the tsunami, and some have lost their relatives, some have lost loved ones, but they still press on. They don't like mull over it. They don't throw pity parties on themselves, but they just go forward in life because that's what you do. You know, yeah.
ここでの生活はね、私たちをね、生かしてくれたみんな仲間です。全国の皆さん、世界各国の皆さんが私たちを助けてくれたことを本当にありがたいと思います。涙が出るほど本当に幸せにしていただきましてありがとうございました。ここは釜石。
It's been a long time. People have moved on, but we just showed that we are still there for them and we are still caring for them. And I think that really touched them in some way.
At that time I was Sec 3. My secondary school actually makes us go for Flag Day every year. I remember I went to Clementi with my friends and we were just telling them, okay, so you need to help the people in Japan. I did not expect myself to be there after and seeing the money that I raised to be building nursery schools, community centers at Japan. Like, it was really, really unreal. Like, I couldn't believe it.
これはですね、七ヶ浜の町民にですね、遠山保育所のネーミングを募集をしまして、で募集集まった中からライオンパークということがシンガポールさんからの支援によって出来上がったものですから、ライオンパークということで命名をさせていただきました。
It may sound really generic, but I really mean it when I say I became more grateful for everything, like family and friends and my house and Singapore. Like, we're so protected from these natural disasters, so yeah, I'm just a lot more grateful for these kind of things.
So I wanted to share that video for a few reasons. There's a longer documentary, but I thought it really showed, first of all, the resilience of the Japanese people, and also the way that people from two countries came together. So the connection between the people from Singapore, seeing the real impact of the volunteer work that they did for the region. But as you can see, there were still a lot of people living in temporary housing. And not only was there a human cost, but there was also longer-term impact, including environmental impact. So the Earth actually shifted on the axis of rotation due to this earthquake. In the year after the earthquake, there was more than 5,000 aftershocks in Japan. So Japan normally has a lot of small earthquakes. There's a lot of fault lines, there's a lot of volcanic activity, but 5,000 is a pretty high number, and especially when the highest was 7.9. Now remember, the Great Tohoku earthquake was a 9.0, so 7.9 is still a pretty high earthquake, a pretty large earthquake. Japan's northern Honshu coastline dropped by 2 feet, and the main island of Honshu moved east by 8 feet. So there were these really big environmental impacts that happened. The Earth actually shifted in a bunch of different ways, which is pretty incredible. You also had the Pacific Plate sliding westward and the tsunami breaking off icebergs of an ice shelf, which was very far away from where the earthquake actually happened. And buildings destroyed by the tsunami have released a lot of ozone gases and all sorts of stuff into the atmosphere. When you see the destruction, you don't necessarily think about... I found this really interesting because I feel like you don't necessarily think about these long-term environmental impacts to a natural disaster like this. And it's pretty incredible that it's so powerful that it permanently changes characteristics of the Earth. All right, so the road to recovery. So Japan in 2012 established a reconstruction agency, and the reconstruction agency has a 10-year plan for recovery in the area. So we've already passed the first 5 years, and for the first 5 years, about $250 billion were concentrated towards reconstruction in that area. And then in the next 5 years, there's another $65 billion that is dedicated to helping further complete all of the reconstruction that they want to complete. Now, currently they've done a lot, right? All the debris in Miyagi and Sendai have been cleared out. They've started rebuilding. A lot of people still don't have permanent housing, but a lot of people have been able to move into their permanent housing. In Fukushima, because of the radiation issues, there's still certain areas where they haven't been able to clean up the debris, but that's getting a lot better as well. The evacuees are reduced. So originally there were 470,000 people displaced due to the earthquake and tsunami. And the official reconstruction numbers from this agency are that now, because people have moved to permanent housing, there's only 180,000 people that are displaced. Now, the New York Times article that I handed out today, their official numbers as of last year that there are 87,000 people who are still in temporary housing. So there's still a lot to be done. Another big issue was that because of Fukushima is an area that produces a lot of produce and food and all sorts of things like that. But with concerns about contamination from nuclear power, even as they've been rebuilding that area, people are still concerned about eating produce that is grown in that region. So the government's been doing a lot of rigorous testing of the stuff that's grown there, and the levels of contamination in the areas that people are living in and growing in again are back to normal levels. So that's a good sign. They've also lifted the evacuation order for most of Fukushima, but there are still areas close to where the nuclear reactor is that people have not been able to move back in due to radiation levels. All right, there's a lot of different organizations that have been doing relief efforts over the years. Japanese Red Cross. Red Cross tends to do a lot of stuff in the immediate aftermath of an incident, and then other organizations often come in. Peace Boat, we have the Jet AA USA, that's the Jet Alumni Association. We had our own fund that we did raise money from. The Taylor Anderson Memorial Fund, which is a video I'm going to show you right now. Taylor Anderson was a JET program participant in Ishinomaki who lost her life. She was the first American casualty of the disaster, and in her memory, her family set up the Taylor Anderson Memorial Fund, which is to this day continuing to do relief efforts in the area. Kizuna Project, we have Second Harvest, which is a Japanese food bank. They're still providing food for people in the affected area, and many others. So this video, we'll take a look briefly at what the Taylor Anderson Memorial Fund has done so far. the areas that a lot of support was required was, emotional support, especially for the children. There are a lot of people left a lot of children left as orphans, and that's one of the things that I think is particularly important that the Taylor Anderson Memorial Fund has done, which is really focused on children, both in supporting the schools, but also supporting social workers and PTSD and all sorts of other things. So, as you can see, a lot of people are still living in temporary housing. There's still a lot that needs to be done. So I wanted to end this on kind of a positive note of what you can do to help. So the JET program, Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, we every year have done this thing called JET's Rally for Tohoku, in which the Global Giving Organization will match 50% by 50% all of the donations that are given. And that all goes to the Taylor Anderson Memorial Fund, the organization we just saw the short video on. And that fund is continuing to do a lot of work in the affected area, and I encourage you to take a look to contribute. We also have in Orlando the Tewasa Group, and this is a local grassroots community group developed by Japanese people who live in Orlando, who continues to do support in the Tohoku region. And they focus on person-to-person support. So they collect money and various other things and send them directly to survivors of the tsunami, so that it's going directly to the people that need the help and the assistance. We also have the 113 project, and this is by the same documentarian who did the Tohoku Tomo movie that we'll be screening on March 30th. And one of the big issues that happened after this whole thing, even after the recovery progressed, is it's had a huge impact on Japanese tourism to Japan. And tourism in Japan has always been a big economy booster and has been very, very good for the community, and especially in the Tohoku region where there's a lot of nature, hiking, hot springs, all sorts of things like that. People aren't really going there. So this is a series of movies, 113 instead of 311, because it was March 11th, 2011, that highlights different, very short videos that have different aspects of the things that occur in the Tohoku region, such as local festivals, community things, and you can watch them online on that website. And so that's just to bring awareness that, Tohoku is rebuilding, the people are resilient, and it's a great place to go visit. There's a lot of other charitable organizations. I put this other link up that has basically a list of charitable organizations that have done and are continuing to do work in the Tohoku region. Yes?
Well, according to what I've been reading, today the nuclear facility still spills 300 billion gallons of nuclear waste into the Pacific. And that's been going on since 2011 till today. And I know that TEPCO, which is Japan's electrical company, hasn't been able to be sued because the generators were built by General Electric. General Electric, it's a corporation that is above and everybody. So how does the government fight TEPCO? Well, not TEPCO, but General Electric, to actually get justice for this?
I mean, that's a good question. This has been a nuclear disaster on, up there with like Chernobyl. We haven't seen something like this in a really long time. It's been very problematic to, deal with the issue. I do know the slide that I had showed about the nuclear sentiment. A few officials were indicted for what happened, because it showed that it was not just problems with how it was constructed. I mean, it was constructed in a way that they didn't think that this type of disaster could happen, and so it wasn't prepared to handle this double disaster. But people were indicted for lack of training or bad management, so some people have been, held accountable in a certain way. But of course, the bigger issue is figuring out how do we prevent this from happening again, and how can we hold, if companies are going to create nuclear power plants like this, they need to be sure that they are safe. And because nuclear power is something we're using all over the world, it's something that affects all of us. So I don't know the answer, but I think it's a great point. Anyone else? Comments? Questions?
I just had no idea that there were still so many people that were not back in the homes and back to normal, so to speak.
Yeah, one of the reasons I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about this for the 5-year anniversary, and this is true of, I think, every natural disaster, not just what's happening in Japan, but Haiti and other countries where they've had huge natural disasters, even New Orleans, talking about the U.S., is that at first it's very present. You see these articles from 2011. There's a lot of articles in the New York Times. There's a lot of articles, Washington Post. It's all over the news. You see the videos. You see it's kind of like, it's like a train wreck. You can't tear your eyes away. It's all over the news. And then people kind of forget about it, right? Time goes on, and we here in the U.S. are not affected really by what's happening in the Tohoku region of Japan. And so we're like, all right, there was a natural disaster, but it's 5 years later, like surely things have gotten better. And they have gotten better, but at the same time, I think it's important to remember that these types of recovery efforts, no matter where it is, take a really long time, and they require a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of effort on the part of volunteers and on the government. And one of the big concerns that I came across when researching this presentation was that with the Olympics coming up in 2020, people in the Tohoku region are kind of worried, like, is the government going to forget about us? Are they going to turn their eye to preparing for the Olympics and forget about the recovery that needs to happen here? And I'm hoping that that won't happen, but I think that's a very reasonable concern.
How much money will the government make off the Olympics? Couldn't that be used to pay for the damages?
That's a good question. I don't know. I have no idea. I know that they've been doing a lot of things in Japan already to start to prepare for the Olympics. So the JET program, for example, Japan Exchange and Teaching Program, formerly there were no assistant language teachers through the JET program placed in Tokyo. But over the past few years, they've added 300, I think, 100 each year. And so because they're concerned about the English-speaking proficiency of people in Tokyo when you have a lot of foreigners coming in. That's just one example that I'm aware of. I'm sure that they're doing other things. I think it would be, if the reconstruction effort hasn't progressed to the point where the government hopes it will by 2020, using money from the Olympics would be a great use. But I think that what we've seen in a lot of countries who have the Olympics is that that's not what happens. So I don't know that Japan would be any different in that respect.
His question actually, how, because I know in the United States, every city and every county has for its own problem. Like Flint, Michigan was happening now. Flint, Michigan is paying for it, not Miami, Florida. So is it very similar in Japan as well, where each city will pay for its own infrastructure in that way?
That's a good question. I don't know specifically. I know that in the case of education, for example, I taught in Japan, and that's been one of my areas of research. In terms of education, the system is very different from the U.S. There's a national education system. There's national funding for the schools. So you don't see that disparity in funding that in schools that you see here, where it's partially comes from property taxes or whatever. And so I don't know if that extends to the community level or not. I mean, similar to the U.S., Japan is broken up into prefectures, which are like our states. And they do have their, governmental bodies that oversee the prefecture itself, the governor of the prefecture, and they have local government as well. But I'm not sure exactly how the funding structure is. I know in the case of schools, it's very different. It's more of a national system. But I couldn't say if that's the same in terms of things like this. Now, obviously, there's a lot of the things that resulted from the earthquake and tsunami kind of have a broader impact on Japan. So it was a national issue because it impacts national tourism, especially in the aftermath of everything. Tourism's really declined, and it's only up to, I think, about 60% of what it was pre-disaster, especially with the nuclear concerns that people had. Fukushima was a huge producer of food. And because of the nuclear impact, and because even the places where the nuclear readings are low now, people are still nervous about it. They hear Fukushima, even in places in Japan, they don't want to they're afraid of eating that produce. So that is a national issue, which is why they have the national recovery. But I really don't know the breakdown of like local to national support. Yes.
So in regards to the great idea, if it would happen, of the Olympics paying for the recovery, I think I had the World Cup in my mind when I was thinking that the problem is not even would the money make it to that, but is the country making money at all? Because I remember when the World Cup was more in the news, kind of the idea was that the countries are the one paying for everything, and FIFA takes all the money, not even that the country gets the money. So I pulled up Google and I typed, do countries make? And the first search result after first country make, at least for me, was money off of the Olympics. And there's it's a New York Times article, so I can't digest it enough right here, but it seems to be saying the same thing that I was thinking about the World Cup, where the countries are making the investment of paying to build all these stadiums. And then there's the claim that all the tourism and spending from these things will provide economic benefit, but that claim, and I hear this all the time in different articles, not just pertaining to these big international things, but even using taxpayer money to build, American Airlines or whatever, that this claim that actually produces public benefit seems unproven in any sort of empirical way, that it's so short-lived and so canceled out, if not overwhelmed by the investment in the facilities in the first place, that my worry would be that there is no money to even go to.
Great position. Yes.
I also heard on the news that the Yakuza are the ones that are putting a lot of money into construction of stadiums. So not even the state.
That might be true. I really couldn't substantiate, but I think that the Yakuza do run a lot of the construction companies in Japan, so they make money off of that. But I don't think that's any different from any of the private contracts that governments will put out with any construction company anywhere doing that type of thing.
I'm just going to comment that even, the only thing I could say that the countries are making money off of would be the tourism aspect of the Olympics and how many people go to see it. That's the only thing I can think of that they will be making a direct profit off of.
Yeah, but then does that cancel out the amount that they spent on building stadiums and stuff? If anything, hopefully they break even. But
I mean, I think I don't know. It would be. I think it's a very hard thing to measure, and that's probably why we don't have a lot of concrete information. They say, oh well, it brings tourists in the country, it brings people there buying things. We can make Olympics products and sell those Olympics products and put Tokyo Olympics or whatever, World Cup, all these things on it, but it's really hard to measure whether the increase is the result of something like the Olympics or the World Cup or not. And a lot of countries do spend a lot of money building these stadiums. I think it was Brazil that had a really big issue where there were a lot of poor people who were like, why are you spending all this money building these big stadiums instead of helping us? We've been here a lot longer and we're suffering.
Mine's kind of comment. When I was in Japan, where I live was very far from the airport area, so media was media was one of the resources to get the information. But unfortunately, as time passes by, the media didn't talk about it as much as it did right after the disaster happened. So it's kind of I kind of feeling sad, this must not be forgotten. So all of the information, how the situation of nuclear plant is, or how the local people live, all of this information must be kept recorded.
Great comment. I mean, the reason actually I volunteered to do this presentation is because right now I'm doing my PhD and my research is not focused on Japan, but I really wanted to know what is the current state of the recovery. It's 5 years later. What has actually been done? What still needs to be done? And I think you're absolutely right. With any natural disaster like this, it's so easy to forget about it when it doesn't affect your daily life, but there's a real human cost, and we should try to remember these things and keep the people in our minds, especially when it comes to an anniversary of the disaster.
Do you think disasters like this open up the job market for those that are displaced and like rebuilding and construction, or is it more outsourced to other countries or lower paid?
That's a good question. I would suspect in Japan doesn't have a lot of foreign companies working in Japan compared to someplace like the US. So I would suspect that most of the jobs for reconstruction and stuff are going to local people. But considering how many jobs are lost due to a disaster like this, I would have a hard time guessing what the balance would be in terms of jobs created versus the jobs lost just by, like I think they said in one of the videos, there was one town where the mayor died, 50 government workers, there was like nobody left from the whole government organization in that local area. And so those jobs will need to be replaced, but what happens, they got to figure out who's going to do that job. Do they need as many people? They have to rebuild the buildings, and the reconstruction building it's short term, right? Eventually, the reconstruction will finish, and so those jobs are not permanent jobs. All right, any final comments? Last comments?
I would say what you said about natural disasters fading is true of human-made disasters as well. I mean, I don't even know if it was 2 or 3 years ago when it was really big on every news outlet about just the turmoil Egypt was in politically, and there was, all the overthrows and all the protests and all the police and all the, just a lot. I don't even remember all the details. I think it was probably 2 or 3 years ago. But at least, on NPR and New York Times and stuff that I followed that surround me, it was like daily bombardment. And I was following it really closely. And back then I could have told you like who the people were. And then all of a sudden that kind of just stopped. And like I know that didn't just go from turmoil to everything being fine, but I couldn't tell you what's going on, anymore. And it just was like, well, from one way to the next, this whole country is burning and falling apart. To I haven't heard about it since then. So I think it's a big problem in a lot of different types of conflict.
I think that's a great point. I was just thinking about this morning when I was listening to NPR. They were talking about Syria and Syrian refugees, and the Syrian crisis has been going on for a long time, and yet I feel like we're hearing less and less about it. And when people are talking about it is when it's okay. Europe's talking about it because they don't know what to do about the refugees, and they don't want the refugees, or some countries don't want the refugees. They're talking about it because it impacts them. They're not talking about it because this human cost is continuing for a long time. And so I think that's a really, if we're going to have a global mindset, all of these types of disasters are things that, we tend to, they stop being represented in the media. But it's important to try to stay on top of it so that we remember what. All right, well, we're going to finish up. I'd like to encourage you all to come see our movie screening on March 30th in GL 100, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Wesley Julian, the director of Tohoku Tomo, will be there. Consul General Okaniwa from the Japanese consulate in Miami will be there. And Brian Barber, a PhD student here in international relations, who's lived in the Tohoku region and whose wife is from that area, will be there on the panel as well. We'll watch the movie, we'll talk, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions, and you can get Global Learning medallion points. So if you need those, please come. All right, that's all. Thank you all for coming.